You were kind of right. You put so much on the table, Natasha Clark, that it would have been, frankly, miraculous if Rishi Sunak hadn't picked any of it up. But I beg your pardon, if Keir Starmer hadn't picked any of it up. But he did go in pretty hard on prisons with a side order of knives.
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad at all.
I'll take a point there.
Good.
And yes, if we'd had time to discuss what the Prime Minister would have wanted to talk about, it's obviously the economy. And he thinks it's going gangbusters. I'd love to hear more evidence of that. But yes, going in on prisons is something that Keir Starmer's done a few times, and I think quite successfully. You know, our prison system, the Minister of Justice is in absolute crisis, and everybody knows it. But Rishi Sunak seemed not to know the details of this report from yesterday that was done by the Chief Inspector of Prisons into Lewes Prison, which, you know, Rishi Sunak was wrong. What he said at Prime Minister's Questions just now, when he said that high-risk offenders would not be released earlier. That is categorically not the case, according to this report that was released yesterday about Lewes Prison, which says that high-risk offenders were part of those cohort, which were being released early. And, you know, it completely destroys.
Did Starmer bring that point home strongly enough, do you think?
Yeah, no, I think so. He did repeat it back to himself, but Rishi Sunak didn't have the answer. He didn't have the details on what that report said, and he just said they should not be being released early. Of course they shouldn't, but they are.
But they are being.
And it completely, you know, Keir Starmer was very tactical in choosing to go on this, because it destroys Rishi Sunak's argument from earlier this week that he is a risk to Britain's security.
Yes.
And it was a nice tie-in with that speech that Rishi Sunak gave on Monday.
What did we think about this gambit? I mean, when he says 7.0, he's talking about a sense that Rishi Sunak is a little bit like a detached shower head bouncing around in the bottom of your bath, in that you don't know what direction it's going to spray in next, and the idea of actually getting washed underneath it is it's slim. Because you know, he was the change candidate. We've spoken about that, and now he's the safe candidate, the security candidate. All of which, whatever costume he puts on, is undermined by the fact that they've been in power for 14 years. He's failed to sort of detach himself from that legacy. He tried that earlier this week by sort of talking about Liz Truss in terms. But why do you think? Usually there are focus groups involved, although we're in such uncharted territory now with this 6-month-long election campaign. Why do you think he is putting so much energy this week, because we don't know what version 8.0 will be, into trying to portray Keir Starmer as unsafe, a former DPP as being unsafe?
I think they think it's they clearly think it's a good strategy to go down. Whether it will work, I really don't think so. I don't think the public are going to buy it, purely because I don't think you could accuse someone who, you know, a top lawyer who has worked as DPP for many years, as being somebody that doesn't care about the criminal justice system, that doesn't care about keeping our country safe. I just don't think that comparing Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn are, you know, it actually feeds into
It doesn't land.
And it feeds into the narrative that Keir Starmer himself wants to portray, which is that Labour has a changed party and that he is no longer
this is the mad thing,
like Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes, I know.
Jeremy Corbyn isn't in the Labour Party anymore. You can't make that
Natalie
argument.
Elphicke is.
Yeah, and you know, whether you
for good
agree
or for ill,
you agree with that or not, the Labour Party is not the same Labour Party it was in 2020 when Keir Starmer inherited it, and he will absolutely relish making the point, but equally is choosing today to pick holes in Rishi Sunak's argument that the life would be unsafer under a Keir Starmer government, because just look at the amount of prisoners that you're letting out that are high risk.
Wandsworth
tears
Prison,
it apart.
arguably an even bigger story this week than Lewes Prison. It's quite easy to remember because the governor who has resigned following a prison inspection this week, or last Thursday, somewhat felicitously for people who struggle as they get older to remember names, is called Katie Price, which is a name that is not going to slip out of your mind anytime soon. Indeed, some coverage includes the brackets, not to be confused with the reality star, just in case you thought she might have been moonlighting as the governor of Wandsworth Prison. But the idea that the state of prisons or the state of criminal justice is something that Rishi Sunak can hit Keir Starmer with is, let's say, optimistic. What about national security? What about the idea that he would be less effective against threats from Russia or China? Because I'd like to see a little bit more flesh on these bones. I don't understand what he thinks he's doing, really.
So his argument, which he's trying to set out on Monday, is that because the Labour Party haven't committed to his timetable of 2.5% of 2030, that's going to, as he, quote, said, embolden our enemies like Putin.
Right, yes.
It's a bit of a step, isn't it?
It's a bit of a stretch, Natasha. There's Vladimir Putin cracking open
that's what Rishi Sunak said. He said,
wine cellars tonight.
Can't believe it. You know, imagine what Putin's going to say when he reads this, is what Rishi Sunak said. I don't think he's paying too much attention, but I could be wrong. But look, it doesn't wash, because I think Rishi Sunak's late to the party on talking about security. I don't think he's been particularly on the front foot on defence spending. As Chancellor, we were constantly hearing about rows of him blocking more money for defence, and it wasn't a priority for him at all. He was the Chancellor. He was the guy in charge of the purse strings.
That's where the showerhead analogy comes from. Is it is just spraying everywhere.
And that's what I was speaking to somebody who used to work in Number 10 this week, and that's what they fear that is actually going completely wrong with the Sunak operation, is that the messaging is all over the place.
Scattergun.
It's a completely scattergun approach. And, they pointed back to elections, 2019 was the election they pointed back to, where they said that our messaging was really strong. And even if you remember the early days of the COVID pandemic, we all remember, and it was all drilled into our heads, the sort of wash your hands messaging that came from the government. And arguably that messaging was incredibly strong at the time. People did buy into it, and it worked. And that's something that you can't say about this government, and you can't say about this Prime Minister. We can talk about what Rishi Sunak is and wants to stand for. But I don't think anybody, if you have asked a voter on the street, what do you think the message coming out from the government is going to be, and what do you think of the things that Rishi Sunak will want to talk about in the election? I don't think, and even though we are so far away from an election, this is exactly what the government needs to be thinking about, what their messages are going to be, because they need to hammer them home every day from now until polling day if they've got a chance of winning.
And that laser-like focus on something, even if it's complete rollicks like get Brexit done, just it makes campaigning so much easier.
Exactly. And again,
don't stop to examine the truth of the claim or the truth of the promise. I don't know if you follow John Byrne-Murdoch at the Financial Times. He's the king of graft. Brilliant. He's great, isn't he?
It's honestly too clever for me.
He put something up earlier this week about perceptions on crime and the way that we are all, our local crime experience is actually not bad. Most people, their genuine experience of crime in their local area is pretty steady, and it hasn't got particularly worse, and on it carries. The figures are falling, in fact.
They are, yeah.
But 2/3 of people think crime is on the rise. It's actually at its lowest level for 30 years. And the national picture, when people are asked, they think the national picture is getting worse. So they and it's media. This is largely a creation of media. But both party leaders have kind of handcuffed themselves to a bandwagon heading in the opposite direction. Sunak has somehow tried to turn it into crime will be worse under Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer has to argue crime is terrible under the Conservatives. So for both of them are now in a space that doesn't actually exist. The Social Trends report shows 2/3 of people think crime is on the rise. The statistics reveal it's at its lowest level for 30 years.
That's
mad politics, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's obviously two levels of reporting crime: the actual crime data that comes in, but also I can't remember. It's the Crime Survey of England and Wales, I believe it's called, on whether you have reported or seen crimes but not reported them. So there's two different slight measures, and I believe they're both falling. But yes, it's obviously a perception that Keir Starmer wants to get into, because if his strategy to try and win over Tory voters, and like I say, the Conservatives, they are the people that you say usually have gone on crime, tough on crime. But Rishi Sunak wants to say, look, I'm locking prisoners up for longer. I'm not releasing anybody before 2/3 of their sentence. That's something that they've produced, and they consistently want to be seen as the people that are tough on crime. We've got now, the results of that are now in our prisons, which are now overfilling.
Yes.
Arguably a success of government to keep dangerous prisoners up for longer. But yes, I think it is, and it potentially is the media's fault when
everybody thinks it's terrible, and it's actually getting better. We can all hold some responsibility for that.
Yeah, although to point out that there are parts of the country that
of course
knife crime is going up, fraud is going up, shoplifting is going up, and
yes.
people do have legitimate concerns about that too.
It's almost I don't mean you territory, isn't it? Crime's absolutely awful, but I don't mean where you live. And then Stephen Flynn. Now on this one, you were correct to call it prisons, but I think I almost got this word for word on what he would go on his question.
Why is that?
Well, just because I thought it was a wide open goal that if the Prime Minister stands up and compares you to the Russians, the Iranians and the Houthi rebels.
Did he though?
Well, that was what yesterday's phone-in was about.
I did, and I listened carefully to that.
And it was inconclusive.
I think that Rishi Sunak is correct to describe the SNP as a threat to Britain, to the United Kingdom.
Yes, but possibly not right
putting
to do it in the same breath as those other threats.
And it wasn't in the same breath. It was significantly later on in the speech, a good 4 paragraphs, I'd say, afterwards. So I don't think you can. I think the Scottish nationalists will seize an opportunity to hit the Prime Minister with that. But I personally think that it was slightly overhyped by them.
It was an odd exchange in a way, because they're both speaking to completely different audiences. Stephen Flynn's followers will completely agree with everything he said, and Rishi Sunak's followers...
Well, they're both right, aren't they?
Well, precisely. You
works.
do seek the destruction of the United Kingdom in its current form, but paragraph placement notwithstanding...
they're not on the same level of Russia and China.
No,
and
but there was a
believes that
deliberate
they are.
conflation, I think. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a very odd thing to stick into the speech at all.
He was trying to scattergun absolutely. There was nothing he didn't talk about in that speech. Back to the shower analogy.
It's good, that, right?
It's quite good. I like it. We can use that again. But yeah, he absolutely tried to talk about everything in that speech, from education, the NHS, crime, security, culture wars. I'm surprised he didn't mention the lanyards, but which was, again, going back to PMQs, one of Keir Starmer's funniest off-the-cuff jokes, I think, this week was when he was saying, the Prime Minister's on the front line of the culture war against lanyards, and I think he's been busy with that, which was
Milk
was
Monitor
quite good.
was quite good as well.
Milk Monitor
that
was
could
quite
stick.
good. James, did you have a milk monitor when you were at school?
No, Margaret Thatcher took away our milk.
Did they?
Yeah.
Well, I was
Do you not know that? Thatcher, you're far too young.
I don't even know what a milk monitor is. What is a milk monitor?
Snatcher. We used to have free milk.
Sure,
free milk, you'd have a little mini bottle
I
of milk.
know that, but
Right.
what's a milk monitor?
The person making sure you didn't steal 2 bottles of milk.
Right.
It's the same way of any monitor.
Okay.
I bet, actually, they're all too young.
So before my time.
It is. I grant you. Thatcher milk snatcher. Actually, I was at private school, so I think we carried on.
Did you get milk at
We carried
private
on
school?
having milk, actually.
You probably did, yeah.
Long after Margaret Thatcher, probably still get it, in fact.
God, how the other half live.
Isn't it? Right. Free milk.